I was standing on the sidewalk with 2 suitcases and a trash bag full of my clothes when my own daughter locked the door behind me and said, "You're not my responsibility anymore." 3 days later, that same daughter was blowing up my phone, crying so hard she could barely speak, begging me to come back and save her from the disaster she had created. So before you judge me, before you decide who the villain is in this story, tell me honestly, if your child threw you out of the home you helped build the moment they got rich, would you still help them when everything fell apart? I'm 50, 8 years old, divorced, and until recently, I thought my life was finally settling into something peaceful. I had raised my daughter alone for most of her life. Her father walked out when she was 8, and from that day forward, it was just the 2 of us against the world. I worked double shifts, skipped vacations, wore the same winter coat for 10 years, and told myself every sacrifice was worth it if it meant she'd never feel abandoned or unsafe. I didn't date much. I didn't chase dreams. My dream was her. Everything I did was for her, and for a long time, she seemed to understand that. Her name is Lily. She was bright, ambitious, and stubborn in a way that used to make me proud. Even as a teenager, she had this fire in her eyes, this certainty that she was meant for more. I encouraged that. I pushed her to apply to schools she thought were out of reach. I stayed up late helping her with essays after coming home, exhausted from work. When she got into a good university on a partial scholarship, I cried harder than I did the day she was born. I took out loans I knew I'd probably never fully pay off just to make sure she didn't have to drop out. And when she graduated, she hugged me and whispered, "I'm going to take care of you one day, Mom, I promise." For a while, she tried. After college, she landed a job in finance, and within a few years, she was making more money than I ever had in my entire life. She bought us a modest house and insisted I move in with her. She told everyone it was because she didn't want me living alone. But I knew it was also because she liked being able to say she was the kind of daughter who took care of her mother. I didn't mind. I cooked. I cleaned. I handled the things she didn't have time for. I thought we were a team. But something changed when the money really started coming in. It wasn't overnight. It was subtle at first. The way she'd correct me in front of her friends. The way she'd sigh if I asked too many questions about her work. The way she started reminding me, jokingly at first, that it was her house. Don't forget who pays the bills. She'd laugh and I'd laugh too, even though something about it made my chest feel tight. Then came the inheritance. Her grandfather on her father's side, a man I barely tolerated and who barely acknowledged Lily growing up, passed away unexpectedly. None of us thought much would come of it. He was wealthy, yes, but distant, bitter, and estranged from almost everyone. When the lawyer called, Lily assumed it would be a small amount, maybe a token gesture. Instead, she inherited $33 million. I remember the day she got the confirmation. She came home shaking, pale, eyes wide like she'd just seen a ghost. She handed me her phone and said, "Mom, look." I sat down because my knees gave out. $33 million. Not a lottery win, not something taxed down to nothing. Real, liquid wealth. Enough money to completely erase every fear I had ever carried. At least that's what I thought. The weeks that followed felt unreal. Lily quit her job. She hired financial advisors, lawyers, accountants. People I'd never met were suddenly walking through the house like they owned it. She redecorated, replacing furniture I'd picked out with sleek, cold pieces that looked like they belonged in a hotel lobby. She stopped eating my cooking and ordered expensive takeout, or went to restaurants where the menus didn't list prices. She started talking about my future in a way that didn't include me anymore. And then the comments started. She told me I was too negative, that I didn't understand wealth, that my poor mindset was holding her back. She said I embarrassed her by asking how much things cost. She asked me not to talk to her advisors unless spoken to. She started locking her office door when she took calls. I felt like a guest in a home I once helped run. I tried to talk to her. I told her she was changing, that I felt pushed aside. She laughed and said, "Mom, this is what growth looks like. You wouldn't get it." That sentence hurt more than I can explain. I had spent my entire life making sure she could grow. And now she was telling me I was the problem. The final blow came on a Tuesday afternoon. She asked me to sit down at the kitchen table. There were papers laid out neatly, like she was preparing for a business meeting. She didn't ask how my day was. She didn't offer tea. She just said, "We need to talk about living arrangements." I remember my hands going cold. She told me she needed her space, that now that she was entering a different level of life, she needed independence. She said I had become emotionally dependent on her. She said people like me often struggled when their children became successful. And then she slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a check and a list of nearby apartments. "I'll cover 3 months of rent," she said. "After that, you're on your own. This is generous, Mom. A lot of parents don't get anything." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, waiting for her to say this was some twisted joke. But her face was firm, professional, almost bored. I reminded her that I had nowhere else to go, that my name was on nothing, that I had given up my own apartment years ago to live with her. She shrugged and said, "That was your choice." I asked her how she could do this to me after everything. She stood up and said, "Please don't be dramatic. This isn't being done to you. It's just time for you to stand on your own feet." 3 days later, she had the locks changed. I didn't fight. I didn't scream. I packed what I could while she watched from the doorway, arms crossed, scrolling on her phone. When I asked if I could come back for the rest later, she said we'd coordinate through her assistant. Her assistant. My daughter, who once cried when I left the room for 5 minutes, now couldn't be bothered to help me carry a suitcase. When the door closed behind me, I felt something inside me break quietly, not loudly, not in a dramatic way. Just a soft, final crack. I sat on the curb for a long time before I could even stand up. I didn't cry until I was alone. I moved into a small, cheap apartment on the edge of town. The check she gave me barely covered the deposit and first month. I unpacked slowly, surrounded by silence, trying to understand how $33 million had somehow made my daughter poorer in every way that mattered. I replayed every moment of her childhood, every sacrifice. Every night I stayed up worrying about her future, and I wondered where I went wrong. Then, on the 3rd night, my phone rang. It was Lily. At first, I didn't answer. Then she called again. And again, by the 5th call, I picked up, expecting anger or arrogance. Instead, I heard sobbing, real, panicked sobbing. She could barely breathe. She kept saying my name over and over, like she was afraid I'd disappear. "Mom," she cried, "I messed up. I really messed up, please. I need you. I don't know what to do." And as I stood there in that empty apartment, phone pressed to my ear, I realized that the story wasn't over yet. Not even close. When I heard my daughter crying like that, raw and unfiltered, something instinctive woke up inside me before my pride could stop it. I didn't even ask what happened at first. I just said, "Slow down, breathe, tell me where you are." She was still in the house. The house she had kicked me out of. The house that now echoed without me. Between sobs, she told me something was terribly wrong, that people were turning on her, that she didn't know who to trust anymore. She kept saying, "I should have listened to you," over and over again, like a confession she was finally ready to make. I didn't go back that night. That's important. I didn't rush over like nothing had happened. I told her I needed to understand exactly what kind of trouble she was in, before I put myself back into her life. There was a long silence on the line after I said that, like she wasn't used to hearing boundaries from me. Then her voice got small. She said, "Okay, I deserve that. I'll tell you everything." She started from the beginning, from the moment the inheritance hit her account. She told me how powerful it felt at first, how everyone suddenly treated her differently. Old classmates reached out. Distant relatives appeared out of nowhere. Advisors flattered her, telling her she was brilliant, that she had incredible instincts, that she didn't need to listen to anyone stuck in an old survival mindset. I knew exactly who they meant by that, me. She admitted that she liked hearing it. She liked feeling untouchable. She liked not needing anyone. Then she told me about the man named Victor. Victor was introduced to her as a wealth strategist. Late 40s, smooth voice, expensive suits, always calm, always confident. He wasn't just advising her on investments, though. He was advising her on life, on image, on relationships. He told her that people close to her would try to hold her back out of jealousy or fear. He told her that emotional attachments could cloud judgment. He told her that real success required cutting off dead weight. I felt sick listening to this because I had warned her. Not directly about Victor, but about exactly this kind of person. I remembered telling her once, years ago, that anyone who made you feel smart by making others seem small was dangerous. She had rolled her eyes back then. Now she was crying, admitting she had listened to him instead of me. Victor convinced her to move fast, to invest aggressively, to lend money to friends who pitched once in a lifetime opportunities, to sign documents she didn't fully understand because he reassured her it was standard procedure. He told her not to involve family because it would complicate things. And when she started feeling guilty about me, about how distant she'd become, he told her that guilt was a manipulation tactic poor people used to keep successful people tied down. She paused then and whispered, "I believed him, Mom." By the second day after she threw me out, things began to unravel. One of her advisors quit suddenly. Another stopped returning calls. Her bank froze one of her accounts pending review. A friend she had loaned millions to vanished without explanation. And Victor stopped answering entirely. His office was suddenly empty. The phone number disconnected. The website gone. She was alone in a house filled with expensive furniture, and no one she trusted. For the first time since the inheritance, she felt afraid. Not just stressed, afraid. And that fear made her realize something she hadn't wanted to admit. She had pushed away the one person who had never wanted anything from her except her safety. She asked me if I would come over the next morning. Not to move back in, just to talk, just to help her think. I told her I'd come, but only as a guest. She agreed immediately, like she didn't dare argue. Walking back into that house the next day felt surreal. The locks were new, but the smell was the same. Her smell, coffee and citrus cleaner. She looked smaller somehow, curled into herself on the couch, makeup smudged, hair pulled into a messy knot. For a moment, I saw the little girl who used to crawl into my bed after nightmares. Then she stood up awkwardly, unsure whether to hug me. I didn't move at first. Then I opened my arms. She broke completely, sobbing into my shoulder like the walls had finally come down. We sat at the kitchen table for hours, the same table where she'd handed me that envelope. This time, there were no papers laid out. Just 2 mugs of tea she didn't drink. I listened. I asked questions. I didn't say "I told you so," even though it burned on my tongue. I could see the humiliation in her eyes already. She didn't need more. I told her something she didn't expect. I told her that money didn't change who people were. It just revealed them faster. I told her that people like Victor thrived on isolation. And I told her that kicking me out wasn't just cruel. It was exactly what someone like him would have wanted. She nodded, tears streaming silently now. Then she asked the question I knew was coming. Can you help me fix this? That's where things became complicated. Because helping her meant stepping back into a world where I had no legal protection, no authority, and no guarantee she wouldn't discard me again once the crisis passed. I told her that. I told her I wouldn't be her emotional safety net while being treated like disposable furniture. She said she understood. She said she was willing to do anything to earn my trust back. I asked her if she'd even noticed how close she came to losing everything. She said no, not until it was almost too late. She showed me her accounts, or what she could access. Millions were already tied up, frozen, or missing. The advisors she trusted had positioned themselves carefully, legally. Everything was technically allowed. Undoing it would take time and strength, and someone who wasn't emotionally compromised by flattery. She looked at me and said quietly, "You were always good at seeing through people." That hurt in a strange way, because it meant she knew all along. Over the next 2 days, I helped her do what she should have done from the start. We contacted independent lawyers, not referrals from her network. We reviewed documents line by line. We documented everything. I watched her struggle with impatience, with the urge to just throw money at the problem and make it disappear. And every time she did, I reminded her that that instinct was what got her here. During that time, something shifted between us. She started asking my opinion again, not as a courtesy, as a necessity. She started listening, really listening. And I started to see the weight of what she'd done settling in. Not just the financial mess, but the emotional damage. On the third night after I came back as a guest, she asked me something that caught me off guard. She asked if I would consider moving back in, not as her dependent, as her mother, with boundaries, with respect, with my name on paper this time. I didn't answer right away. I told her trust didn't come back overnight. She nodded. She didn't push. What she didn't know was that while she was dealing with the collapse of her illusion, I was dealing with something else entirely. Anger, deep, quiet anger. Because I realized that even though she was hurting now, I had been hurt first. And I hadn't yet decided what justice looked like for that. That's when the real choice began to take shape. Not just whether to help her, but how, and whether saving her meant sacrificing myself all over again. So before I tell you what I decided to do next, before I explain how far I was willing to go and what it ultimately cost her, I want you to pause for a moment. Put yourself in my place. Your child gets unimaginably rich, throws you out like an inconvenience, then comes crawling back when the world turns cold. Would you help them no matter what, or would you make sure they truly understood the consequences first? Because the way I chose to help her changed our relationship forever, and it changed her life in ways she never saw coming. That night, after I left her house and returned to my little apartment, I didn't sleep. I lay on the unfamiliar mattress staring at the ceiling, replaying everything she'd said, everything she hadn't said, and every moment of my life that had led us here. I loved my daughter. That was never in question. But love didn't erase betrayal, and it didn't erase the quiet humiliation of standing on a sidewalk with my belongings while she locked me out. I realized something uncomfortable in those dark hours. If I rushed back into her life exactly as before, if I soothed her fears and fixed her problems without any cost to her, she would learn nothing. And worse, I would teach her that I was optional, disposable, a safety net she could cut away and retrieve whenever it suited her. The next morning she called early, not panicked this time, careful, respectful. She asked if we could continue going through documents together. I agreed, but I told her I needed to be honest with her about something first. We met at a cafe, neutral ground. No house, no power imbalance. She noticed I could tell. She didn't comment, but she sat straighter. like a student waiting for a lesson she knew might sting. I told her that I would help her, but not unconditionally. I told her that if she wanted my guidance, she had to accept that I would say no sometimes, that I would question people she trusted, that I would slow things down when she wanted to rush, and, most importantly, I told her that I would never again be in a position where she could throw me out with nothing. Not emotionally, not financially, not legally. Her eyes filled, but she didn't argue. She said she understood. She said she'd do whatever it took. That was the moment I realized she was truly scared, not of losing money, of being alone. Over the next week, the situation got uglier. We discovered that Victor had positioned himself to take a performance fee that, while technically legal, was devastating. Several friends had used vague agreements that made repayment optional. One investment turned out to be a shell that funneled money overseas. Lily oscillated between rage, shame, and denial. Some days she wanted to sue everyone. Other days she wanted to disappear. I stayed steady. I had learned long ago that panic was a luxury for people who had someone else to clean up after them. Around the middle of that week, she asked me something that made my chest tighten. She asked me why I didn't hate her. I told her the truth. I told her I did hate what she'd done, but I loved who she could still be, and I told her something else I hadn't planned to say. I told her that throwing me out hurt more than anything else in my life, including her father leaving us, because when he left I expected it. When she did, I didn't. She cried quietly then, the kind of crying that isn't performative, that doesn't seek comfort. Just grief. I let her cry. I didn't rush to fix it. This is where I want you, listening to this, to really stop and think. This is the point where I had to make a decision that would shape everything that came after. I could have moved back in immediately, re-established myself as her anchor, smoothed over the past, and helped her recover without friction. Or I could do something harder, something that risked her resentment, but might actually protect both of us in the long run. So before I tell you what I chose, I want you to ask yourself honestly, what would you have done? Would you have prioritized peace or accountability? Because my choice changed the power dynamic between us forever. I told her I would not move back in yet. I told her that if she wanted me involved long term, we needed formal agreements. Not because I wanted her money, but because I needed security. I needed acknowledgement that my presence had value. I suggested setting up a trust, one that would ensure I was housed and cared for regardless of her moods or mistakes. I suggested shared oversight on major financial decisions, at least temporarily. I watched her process this, the old pride flaring for a moment before being swallowed by reality. She agreed. That agreement was the beginning of the end for the version of my daughter who thought money made her untouchable. As we worked, I noticed something else. She was exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally. The weight of responsibility, of being surrounded by people who wanted something, was crushing her. One night, she admitted she didn't know who she was anymore. She said, "I thought money would make me confident. Instead, I feel like I'm constantly pretending." I told her that pretending was what had attracted people like Victor in the first place. Then came the call that changed everything. One of the lawyers we hired uncovered something that made the room go silent. Victor hadn't just disappeared. He had left a trail, and that trail led back to someone Lily never expected to be involved, someone close, someone she had defended even after I'd raised quiet concerns. When she heard the name, her face went white. Her mouth opened, then closed. She shook her head and said, "No, that's not possible. They wouldn't do that to me." But they had. And suddenly, the betrayal wasn't abstract anymore. It wasn't about greedy strangers or faceless systems. It was personal, intimate, the kind of betrayal that cuts deeper than losing money ever could. She looked at me with fear in her eyes and asked, "What do I do now?" And for the first time since all of this began, I didn't answer immediately, because the next step wasn't just about recovery. It was about consequence, and about whether I was willing to let my daughter face the full weight of what she'd ignored when she chose to push me away. What happened next forced her to confront not just her mistakes, but the kind of person she had become when she thought she didn't need anyone. And it forced me to decide whether being a good mother sometimes meant letting your child fall. The name the lawyer said out loud didn't just shock Lily, it hollowed her out. I could see it in her eyes, the way they went distant like she was trying to escape her own thoughts. It was her cousin, Mark. The same cousin she'd grown up with, the one who used to stay over during summers, the one who'd congratulated her the loudest when she inherited the money, who'd told her he was proud of her, who'd said family was the only thing that mattered. Mark had been the bridge. He was the one who introduced her to Victor. He was the one who vouched for him, and he was the one quietly taking a percentage off the top while pretending to protect her interests. Lily kept repeating he wouldn't do that. He knows what we've been through. But the documents didn't lie. Emails, transfers, signatures, all clean enough to avoid immediate prosecution, but dirty enough to drain millions. The worst part wasn't the money. It was the realization that while she had been busy proving she didn't need me, she had handed her trust to someone who saw her as a payday. She broke down in the lawyer's office, sobbing so hard they had to bring her water. I sat beside her, steady, even though inside I felt something sharp and complicated. Not satisfaction, not exactly, but a grim confirmation of everything I had feared. When you remove the people who love you without conditions, you leave space for people who love you for profit. That night she begged me to come home with her. She didn't say move back in. She said, "Please don't leave me alone." And I almost said yes immediately. Almost, but something held me back. I told her I would stay late, help her plan next steps, but I would go back to my apartment to sleep. She looked hurt, but she nodded. She was learning, slowly, that trust had to be rebuilt in both directions. Over the next few days, everything came crashing down at once. Lawsuits were prepared, accounts were audited. Friends stopped calling when the money stopped flowing freely. Invitations dried up. The house felt too big, too quiet. Lily told me she'd never felt so exposed. I watched her sit on the edge of the bed one night and say, "I think people only liked me when I was useful." I told her that was a painful but important realization, one I wished she'd never had to learn this way. Then Mark tried to call. She stared at the phone like it was a snake. At first, she didn't answer. Then he left a voicemail. Calm, friendly, like nothing was wrong. He said there had been some misunderstandings and that lawyers were overreacting. That was the moment something in Lily snapped. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She handed me the phone and asked me to listen. When it ended, she looked at me and said, "I want to confront him." I told her we wouldn't do it emotionally. We would do it strategically. We arranged a meeting under the guise of clearing things up. Public place. Lawyers nearby. Everything documented. When Mark walked in, smiling like the charming family man he'd always played, I saw Lily shrink for half a second. Then she straightened. She asked direct questions. He dodged. She presented evidence. He laughed it off. Until the lawyer spoke. That's when his face changed. The confrontation was brutal, not loud, not dramatic. Just cold truth laid bare. Mark's excuses crumbled. His charm evaporated. When he realized there was no way out, he turned angry. He accused Lily of being ungrateful. He said she owed him for helping her navigate wealth. He said people like her didn't survive without people like him. I watched Lily listen, really listen, and then say something that made my chest ache. She said, "The only person I owed anything to, I threw away." Mark left furious. Legal consequences followed swiftly after. The money wasn't fully recoverable, but enough was frozen to prevent total collapse. Lily won, technically, but emotionally she was wrecked. That night, she finally asked the question I think she'd been afraid to ask since the beginning. She asked if I would ever forgive her. I told her forgiveness wasn't a single moment. It was a process. I told her I forgave her for being foolish. I even forgave her for being cruel, but trust would take time. And then I told her something else. I told her that throwing me out had forced me to see myself differently, that I had realized how easily I'd erased myself for her, how I'd accepted scraps of respect because I believed motherhood required it. She listened silently as I told her I would help her rebuild, but not at the cost of my dignity. I told her I would move back in, but only under clear conditions. Legal protections, mutual respect, no advisors without independent review, no decisions made in secrecy. And if she ever tried to discard me again, I would walk away permanently. She agreed without hesitation. But here's the part that surprised even me. When everything started stabilizing, when the worst of the crisis was over, Lily did something I didn't expect. She insisted on making things public within the family. She told them what she'd done, what Mark had done, what it had cost her, and she told them about throwing me out. She didn't soften it. She didn't justify it. She owned it. That public accountability changed her, and it changed how others saw her. Still, the final test hadn't come yet. Because apologies are easy when you're afraid, the real measure is what happens when you feel powerful again. And Lily was about to regain her footing. The question was whether she'd remember the lesson once the fear faded, and whether I was strong enough to leave if she didn't. The last part of this story isn't about money at all. It's about who we become after we're humbled, and whether love can survive the kind of damage that changes you forever. When I finally moved back into the house, it didn't feel like coming home the way it used to. It felt like stepping into a place that remembered me but wasn't sure if I belonged anymore. Lily had prepared the guest room for me, not my old room, and I appreciated that more than she realized. It told me she understood something had shifted. I wasn't resuming my old role. I was entering a new chapter, one where I existed as a person, not just a mother shaped around her needs. First few weeks were tense in a quiet way. We were polite, careful, almost formal. She asked before making plans. She explained decisions instead of announcing them. I watched her closely, not because I wanted to catch her failing, but because I needed to know whether this change was real or just a reaction to fear. Power has a way of creeping back into old habits once the crisis fades, and I was prepared, for the first time in my life, to walk away if I saw the signs. Slowly, I noticed something different. Lily was calmer, more thoughtful. She stopped chasing validation from people who barely knew her. She cut ties with most of the social circle that had appeared after the inheritance. She downsized the house staff. She sold off things she'd bought impulsively and admitted she didn't even like. One night, she cooked dinner herself, clumsy and proud, and we laughed in the kitchen like we used to. That was the first night I felt a crack of warmth instead of tension. She also followed through on every promise she'd made. The trust was established, my housing was secured, my name was included in emergency planning. She insisted I sit in on major discussions, not to control her, but to ground her. And when she disagreed with me, she did it respectfully, no eye rolling, no dismissal, just conversation. Adult conversation. 3 months after everything fell apart, she came to me with a folder in her hands and fear in her eyes again. But this time it was different. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't hiding. She said, "I need your opinion." It was about a major investment opportunity, the kind that once would have gone straight through someone like Victor. We reviewed it together. I asked uncomfortable questions. I said no, And instead of arguing, she nodded and said, "Okay, I trust you." That was the moment I knew she had changed. People like to believe stories like this end with dramatic revenge, with me taking control of her money or teaching her a lesson she'd never forget. But the truth is, the real consequence she faced wasn't imposed by me. It was internal. She lost illusions she could never get back. She learned that money doesn't protect you from loneliness, that independence without wisdom is just isolation, and that the people who love you quietly are often the only ones worth listening to. As for me, I changed too. I stopped shrinking. I stopped believing that being a good mother meant accepting disrespect. I found my voice again, not just with her, but with myself. I started painting, something I'd abandoned decades earlier. I made friends. I built a life that existed alongside hers, not underneath it. Sometimes late at night, Lily apologizes again. She says she still doesn't understand how she could have been so cruel. I tell her I do. Fear and ego are a dangerous combination. But I also tell her this, and I mean it every time. She doesn't get unlimited chances just because she's my daughter. Love doesn't mean immunity from consequences. It means accountability with compassion. So when people ask me if I regret helping her after she threw me out, my answer is complicated. I regret the pain. I regret the silence on that sidewalk. But I don't regret standing my ground. And I don't regret making her face the cost of forgetting where she came from. Because 3 days after she threw me out, she begged for my help. And this time, I gave it on my terms. Not as a doormat, not as a backup plan, but as a mother who finally understood her own worth. If you were on my side in this story, like this video, if you believe parents deserve respect no matter how successful their children become, subscribe for more stories like this. And tell me in the comments honestly, would you have helped your child after something like this? Or would you have walked away for good? I'll see you all in the next story.